One of the perhaps inevitable consequences of understanding knowledge within an overall metaphor of space is that, because as I've already mentioned, there are different types of knowledge, if that's the right word, then there's a possibility of conflict or of conflict, different approaches to knowledge, different uses for that knowledge, and consequently possible spatial conflicts, let's say. And I think probably the one that's most prevalent, the most dominant in my mind, the one that I recognise most in the reading that I do, is the clearest, I should say, I suppose, is the one between religious knowledge and scientific knowledge. Knowledge based on faith and knowledge based on doubt, if you like, or empiricism, which is organised doubt after all. And obviously there are conflicts in the world around that, so perhaps it's a good place to start. It seems to me that if we are using spatial metaphors, then there are a number of ways of anticipating, predicting, and perhaps understanding what's going on with those different knowledge forms and how they're treated. Probably the simplest way in which they have been treated is in Stephen Jay Gould's terms. He calls religion and science non-overlapping magisteria. Non-overlapping magisteria. And I know he's dead now, but he took quite a bit of flack for it and continues to take flack for it from some people within science and probably some people within religion as well. It's a kind of cop-out, as the usual response to that. It's a kind of it's a kind of artificial demarcation, a sort of Berlin Wall built across an area of knowledge and a promise not to trespass, rather than it being a real engagement with the ideas. But nevertheless, you have within that, I think, this idea of non-overlapping magisteria. It's very evident that there is a spatial thing going on there, and how that space has been organised and what one's relationship to that space might be. If religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria, first off they're non-overlapping, which means we have this sort of conscious or non-conscious image of two areas, two land masses perhaps, or two lines drawn on the page, two circles drawn on the page at the beginnings of a Venn diagram. But they don't make contact, or if they do make contact, they're contiguous, they're certainly not overlapping. Because in the sense of potential conflict, it's the areas of overlap that would cause that conflict. So if you just sort of pretend that there's no point of contact or no point of overlap between these two areas, these two spatially designated areas, then there's no problem. And that probably was the case until comparatively recently in terms of religion and science, at least. It's interesting that he uses the term magisteria for those terms. He doesn't say non-overlapping areas or non-overlapping spaces or non-overlapping domains. He uses the term magisteria, suggesting that there's a kind of royal decree on which these borders are based, and according to which the laws of one don't somehow affect the orders of the other, because the majesty of one has decreed certain laws which may differ from the majesty of the other. So this idea of this non-overlapping magisteria, I think, quite clearly identifies the spatial metaphor and presents, if not a solution to it, at least a recognition of perhaps the problem. Okay, so if we're not happy with that idea, and I'm certainly not happy with that idea, what are the alternatives? Well, one alternative, of course, is some kind of invasion. And I think we do see that, not so much in the UK, where I'm speaking from, but certainly in some parts of the world, there are attempts at a kind of invasion, or a kind of colonisation. I'm thinking perhaps, for example, of the attempts to get certain aspects of faith-based knowledge into science curricula in American schools. The intelligent design lobby, for example, which certainly tried to get some ID stuff into the curriculum in Dover, Pennsylvania, I think last year, maybe the end of the year before. And there's been numerous others. I came across one very recently out of Texas, I think it was. And the idea there is that it doesn't acknowledge that these things are non-overlapping. It's that they actually do overlap, and possibly a coterminous. And